You know, it's quite surprising when you think about it. We often picture Christian missions as, well, a primarily Western thing historically.
Right.
But the energy now, the growth, it's overwhelmingly shifted, hasn't it? To the global south, to the east.
Absolutely. A complete flip, really.
Yeah.
The center of gravity has moved.
And despite all that history, all that work, it's still kind of astonishing how many distinct groups, people groups, have been identified just recently as having very little access to the Christian message.
It is. It really highlights the scale of the task still remaining.
Okay, so let's unpack this. This deep dive, we're really focusing on how evangelical perspectives on mission have changed, evolved over the last century or so.
Yeah, and it's fascinating to look back, especially using something like the centenary of the 1910 Edinburgh World Missionary Conference as a reference point. That event was huge for reflecting on mission direction.
Definitely. We're drawing from this collection of essays, Evangelical and Frontier Mission Perspectives on the Global Progress of the Gospel. Really insightful stuff.
Mm-hmm. It gives a great window into that reflection process over 100 years.
Exactly. Now, it's not, the entire picture, obviously.
And its a book could be.
Right. But it offers these really valuable snapshots, these case studies. They show key trends in evangelical thought and practice, at least as the editors saw them.
And what's interesting, as you hinted, is how this huge global effort happens without, a central command center.
Yeah. It's more like a network, an incredibly complex living network of different groups, thinkers, movements, all doing their own thing, but interconnected.
That's a good way to put it. Interconnected, but often independent.
And for you, the listener, getting a handle on this evolution, it's a really efficient way to grasp the big currents that have shaped evangelical missions.
Right. We want to hit those aha moments, those insights that might surprise you without drowning you in, endless detail.
Think of it as the essential roadmap to this whole dynamic global movement. Okay, so let's set the scene. A century ago, give or take, the book talks about the great century of mission. What really kicked off that era? What were the driving forces?
Well, it was a convergence, really. Several powerful things came together. You had figures like William Carey, whose vision just fundamentally shifted how people thought about mission.
Right, the whole idea of organized mission societies.
Exactly, and that vision connected with these big spiritual awakenings that had roots way back in the Reformation and Pietism. So you had this theological and spiritual passion igniting.
Okay, vision and passion. What else?
And then the practical side. Transportation was improving dramatically. Steamships, railways.
Making the world smaller, in a sense.
Precisely. And communication, too. It all just made global outreach much more feasible than it had ever been before. It was a potent mix.
It sounds like it, like all the pieces just fill into place.
Mm-hmm.
But the book notes that, initially at least, this was mainly a British and European show. Why were the Americans sort of slower off the mark with international missions?
That's a good point. You have to remember the context of 19th century America. Their main energy, their focus was really internal.
The westward expansion.
Westward expansion, settling the frontier, building the nation. International missions just wasn't the top priority for many. But it's crucial to add, by the end of that century, things changed. American involvement really surged.
Okay, got it. So let's jump ahead. The period between Edinburgh 1910 and the end of World War II, 1945, the book calls it a time when foundations were shaken. Turbulent is probably an understatement, right?
Oh, absolutely. Just think about the major global events crammed into those few decades.
Yeah, list them off. It's staggering.
You got World War I, the Russian Revolution, the Spanish flu pandemic killing millions globally.
Unbelievable.
Then the Great Depression causing economic chaos, followed by World War II, even more devastating, and ending with the development of atomic weapons.
Wow. Just one massive crisis after another. The world must have felt like it was constantly reeling.
It really did. A period of intense instability, fear, upheaval.
So how did all that turmoil affect the evangelical mission movement specifically? Did it bring people together, or?
Well, it actually surfaced and intensified some internal tensions. The book points to this growing disconnect.
Between who?
Between many missionaries out on the field, who often held more conservative theological views, and the leadership back home in the established mainline denominations, which were often perceived as becoming more liberal.
Ah, okay, so a theological divide widening.
Yes. And the missionaries felt increasingly ignored, marginalized. They felt like they were losing influence over the direction of missions within their own denominations.
So external chaos and internal struggles happening at the same time.
Exactly. A real sense of foundations being shaken, both globally and within the church's mission structures.
Okay, that makes sense. So after World War II, say 1946 up to around 1974, the book titles this section, New Opportunities Amidst Tension and Turmoil. What's the picture here?
It's a fascinating contrast, isn't it? On one hand, you have the Cold War settling in. The constant threat of nuclear annihilation, the doomsday clock, real global tension.
Right, that underlying anxiety.
But on the other hand, you have the collapse of European colonial empires.
Yeah.
Suddenly, dozens of new independent nations are emerging, especially in Asia and Africa.
Creating entirely new contexts, new political realities for mission work.
Precisely. New doors opening, new challenges, new relationships to build. The whole political map was being redrawn.
So new political and geographic opportunities. But what about the theological landscape? You mentioned tensions earlier. Did those continue?
Oh, definitely. From the evangelical perspective, there was growing unease about the World Council of Churches, the WCC, which was gaining prominence then.
What was the concern?
The perception among many evangelicals was that the WCC, in its drive for ecumenical unity, was, let's say, compromising on core theological distinctives, maybe watering down the gospel message.
Okay, so a divergence there. But were evangelicals completely separate?
Not entirely. The book notes that evangelical voices did start to gain some recognition in those broader discussions. There was even an article, I think, in the International Review of Mission that drew links between WCC work and the emerging Lausanne movement.
Ah, interesting. So maybe not fully embraced, but acknowledged as a growing force.
Kind of. It suggests evangelical missiologists were starting to feel like they were, at least occasionally, being listened to, even if bodies like the World Evangelical Fellowship often operated on a parallel track. They were finding their feet, establishing their own platforms.
Right. Setting the stage for what came next. So let's move into that next phase, 1975 to 2000. The book calls this exponential growth and shifting perspectives. What happened here? This sounds like a major shift.
It really was. The most dramatic thing was just the sheer growth of U.S.-based evangelical missions. It was explosive.
How big are we talking?
The book points out, by the early 90s, U.S. evangelical agencies were sending out something like 10 times more missionaries than the mainline Protestant agencies.
10 times! That's incredible.
It's a staggering difference. And this surge was so undeniable that, well, secular academics, historians, sociologists, they couldn't ignore it anymore.
So it forced a reevaluation. They had to acknowledge this wasn't just an extension of old colonial patterns or purely ecumenical efforts.
Exactly. People had to recognize evangelical missions as a distinct, powerful force shaping global Christianity. It shifted the narrative.
And this was also when those sort of defining characteristics of evangelicals became clearer, right? The book mentions 4 key distinctives proposed around then.
Yes. That was Bevington's quadrilateral, proposed in '89, I believe.
Yeah.
It really helped crystallize things. Emphasis on conversion, personal transformation.
Right, a changed life.
Activism, especially evangelism and missions.
Getting the word out.
Being Bible-centered, holding scriptures authoritative.
Crucial.
And being Christ-centered, particularly focusing on Christ's death and resurrection, the atonement. Those 4 really became widely accepted markers.
Okay. So with this massive growth and clearer identity, how did the relationship with groups like the WCC evolve? Did they find more common ground or?
Actually, the opposite. In many ways, the book suggests that by 2000, many evangelical missiologists viewed the WCC and its mission commission, the CWME, as, well, increasingly irrelevant to the core task of global mission as they saw it.
Wow, a complete reversal from feeling they were starting to get a hearing earlier.
Pretty much. The perceived energy, the vitality, the growth, it was clearly located within the evangelical movement itself by that point.
And this wasn't just a U.S. phenomenon, right? The book stresses the rise of majority world mission agencies.
Hugely important. Agencies based in Africa, Asia, Latin America were growing rapidly in strength and number. This really changed the dynamics.
How so?
Well, Western agencies, which used to be the main players, started actively seeking partnerships with these majority world agencies. It wasn't just a one-way street anymore.
So, new networks, new coalitions forming?
Exactly. Groups like COSIM, the Coalition for the Support of Indigenous Ministries, sprang up to facilitate these north-south and even south-south partnerships.
And we started hearing more from majority world thinkers, too.
Definitely. Their voices, their perspectives, their scholarship started gaining real influence in Western academic circles and mission strategy discussions. It became much more of a global conversation.
Truly globalizing mission. So, as they headed towards the year 2000, what was the big goal, the driving vision for evangelical missions?
I think the defining aim articulated then was really about access, ensuring that every single person, no matter their culture or language, had a genuine chance to hear the gospel, understand it in their own context, respond to it, become part of a local church, and grow as a disciple.
Accessibility and contextualization. Very key.
Yeah, yes.
Now, what about Pentecostal and charismatic movements during this period? They were exploding globally, too. How did they fit into this evangelical picture?
That's a crucial part of the story. There was a growing recognition within broader evangelicalism that, hey, these Pentecostals and charismatics share our core convictions.
The ones you mentioned earlier, scripture, evangelism.
Right. Scripture, evangelism, a strong belief in the return of Christ, and just incredible missionary energy. The overlap was undeniable.
But was it a smooth integration?
Not always. Some of the older, more established evangelical missions associations were a bit hesitant, maybe cautious about fully embracing Pentecostal agencies initially. There might have been stylistic differences, theological nuances.
Sure.
But pragmatically, cooperation grew. Though the book notes that even by 2000, some traditional groups still felt a bit distinct from Pentecostal missions.
Okay. And one last thing before we move on technology. The book mentions the internet and faster communication taking hold by 2010. Huge impact, I imagine.
Oh, transformative. Just think.
Ooh.
Instantaneous global communication, easier coordination for teams spread across the world, incredible access to information and resources.
Online training, virtual outreach.
Bible translation tools, connecting with people in closed countries. I mean, it fundamentally changed the how of missions in countless ways. A real game changer.
Absolutely. Okay, so now let's dive into this specific idea the book explores, frontier mission thinking. What exactly do we mean by frontier mission?
Frontier mission thinking really sharpens the focus onto those people groups who have the least access to the gospel. It's about prioritizing efforts towards those cultures, those languages, where there's currently little or no indigenous Christian witness, going where the church isn't yet.
Okay, the places where Jesus' name is largely unknown.
Precisely.
And the book credits several key institutions, key people, with really championing this focus.
Yes, definitely. Fuller School of Intercultural Studies was huge, with influential figures teaching there. Then there's the U.S. Center for World Mission, founded by Ralph Winter, absolutely pivotal.
Ralph Winter comes up a lot here.
He really does. And also, the Perspectives on the World Christian Movement course. That course has had an enormous impact on mobilizing people for missions, shaped by people like Steve Hawthorne and Roberta Winter.
And these were all connected somehow, or separate initiatives?
Interestingly, largely independent initiatives.
Yeah.
But they all seem to converge around this same core concern for the unreached, the frontiers.
So what was Ralph Winter's big insight? What made him focus so intensely on this?
Winter had this profound realization. He looked at the data, looked at where missionaries were going, and saw a huge imbalance.
How so?
He realized that while many missionaries were being sent out, a relatively small percentage were actually going to places where no one had effectively gone before, to these unreached people groups. Most were reinforcing existing work or working among people who already had some access.
Okay, so a strategic gap.
A massive one, in his view.
And he made that distinction between mission and evangelism to highlight this, right? Can you remind us of that?
Yeah, it's a key distinction he pushed. For Winter, mission specifically meant cross-cultural evangelism, crossing significant linguistic and cultural barriers to share the gospel.
Okay.
Whereas evangelism, he defined as sharing the faith within your own culture, your own language group, where those major barriers don't exist to the same degree.
Got it. So mission implies tackling those bigger cross-cultural challenges.
Exactly. And that helps clarify why a special focus was needed for those frontier situations.
So the U.S. Center for World Mission, the USCWM, was founded specifically for this purpose, to focus on the unreached.
Yes. Founded in 1976, its entire focus was on unreached peoples. Its main activities were, well, research identifying these groups, understanding them.
Data gathering.
Crucial data gathering. Then mobilization, getting churches and individuals praying and involved. Training was huge, especially through the Perspectives course. And publishing, getting information out through the William Carey Library and their magazine, Mission Frontiers.
It sounds like a real hub for this frontier thinking. And the perspectives course, tell us more about that. How did it start and what was its goal?
It actually grew out of Winter wanting to follow up with students who attended the big Urbana mission conventions. He felt they needed something deeper.
Deeper than just an inspirational conference talk.
Right. He wanted to challenge them to grasp the whole scope of God's plan for the world, what he called the total task of world evangelization, to see history and their lives from God's perspective.
A shift in perspective makes sense given the name.
Exactly. And a really defining moment was John Stott's address at Urbana 76, "The Living God is a Missionary God." That talk basically framed the entire Bible story as God's mission to reach all peoples. It became the first chapter, the foundation for the Perspectives reader.
Wow. Powerful stuff. A comprehensive call to action.
Very much so.
And the reader itself, the textbook for the course, wasn't just Winter's work, was it?
No, it was a massive collaborative effort. While Winter provided the vision and framework, people like Bruce Graham, Jay Gary, Steve Hawthorne, and others were heavily involved in selecting, editing, and organizing the wide range of articles from different authors and historical periods.
A real team effort to bring together diverse perspectives on mission.
Absolutely. Even if they didn't agree on every single point, the resulting reader became incredibly influential.
So what's the core message someone would take away from the Perspectives course?
At its heart, it's about seeing history through a Christ-centered lens, seeing God actively working through all of time to gather people for himself from every single group, every nation, tribe, tongue.
Okay.
It aims to build this deep hope and confidence in God's ultimate victory, his unwavering commitment to fulfilling his global purposes.
A message of hope grounded in God's big picture.
Precisely.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly. Pentecostal missions and the Unreached. We talked about their incredible growth and energy. Why, according to the book, did Pentecostal mission agencies maybe have a slower initial uptake of this specific unreached people's focus?
That's a really interesting question, and the book suggests a couple of factors tied to their historical priorities.
Okay.
One major factor was their very strong emphasis on partnership with the national churches they would often help start. These churches were growing rapidly, and nurturing them, strengthening them, became a huge focus.
Which is vital work, of course.
Absolutely vital. But sometimes that focus on partnership and building up existing churches could, perhaps inadvertently, overshadow the need for pioneering work among groups where no church existed yet.
So the energy went into consolidation rather than purely frontier work.
To some extent, yes. And related to that, the book mentions a kind of success ethos in some Pentecostal mission circles. Well, visible results, numerical growth, these were often highly valued, which is understandable. But this could sometimes lead to more resources and attention flowing towards fields that were showing faster, more obvious fruit.
Potentially leaving the harder, slower work among less responsive, unreached groups with fewer resources.
Potentially, yes. It wasn't intentional neglect, but maybe an unintended consequence of focusing on visible success and the needs of existing partner churches.
So the very success in some areas might have created a sort of blind spot for the frontiers.
That's one way to think about it.
So what was needed then? How could Pentecostal missions better connect their energy to the unreached?
The book argues for a more intentional connection. Leaders needed to explicitly link that powerful experience of the Holy Spirit's empowerment, which is so central to Pentecostalism, with a specific call to go to those who haven't heard.
Making the link explicit between power and pioneering.
Yes, and prioritizing those unreached ethno-linguistic groups. Rekindling that apostolic dimension of going where Christ hadn't been named.
And did this happen? Did Pentecostal leaders and movements start embracing this frontier focus more?
Oh, yes. The book definitely highlights examples, especially among majority world Pentecostal leaders. Graduates from places like the Bangui Evangelical School of Theology, for instance.
Okay.
They really embraced the unreached peoples concept and are now leading significant mission efforts, particularly in challenging areas like Francophone Africa. It shows that Pentecostal dynamism can be powerfully focused on the frontiers when it's intentionally directed there.
That's encouraging. Okay, let's talk about another key concept from Ralph Winter, the two structures paradigm. What's this all about, and why is it important for understanding mission agencies?
Winter looked at the New Testament and saw basically two kinds of structures God uses. First, there's the church itself, the local congregation, the community of believers. He called this the sodality, comparing it functionally to the Jewish synagogue.
Okay, the gathering of God's people.
Right. But then he also saw these specialized, purpose-driven groups, like Paul's missionary teams. He called these modalities, comparing their specialized function, maybe controversially, to groups like the Pharisees who had a specific focus.
Interesting comparison. So two types of structures.
Yes, and his key point was that both are vital and biblically grounded for fulfilling God's mission. You need the stable community, so totality, and the dynamic, task-focused group modality.
So mission agencies, parachurch organizations, they fit into that modality category. Specialized groups for a specific task.
Exactly. They're designed to tackle specific mission challenges, especially those requiring focused expertise, like cross-cultural work, translation, reaching unreached groups, things a local church might struggle to do alone effectively.
But they should still relate to the church somehow.
Absolutely. Winter stressed that these modalities should ultimately be accountable to and serve the broader church, the sodality.
Now, the book notes that sometimes church leaders have been a bit suspicious of these parachurch groups. Why the tension?
Yeah, that tension has popped up throughout history. Some leaders worry these agencies might become too independent, draw resources away from the local church, maybe even seem like they're competing with it.
The idea that if the church was doing its job properly, you wouldn't need them?
Kind of. That's sometimes the underlying feeling behind the term parachurch, which can carry that negative edge. But Winter argued strongly that they are not just helpful, but necessary expressions of the church fulfilling the Great Commission, especially for specialized tasks.
And the way denominations relate to these agencies varies a lot, doesn't it? The book talks about different types.
Yes, it outlines a spectrum from type A, where the mission agency is basically part of the denomination, funded and overseen by it, all the way to type D, where the agency is totally independent, relying on support from individuals in various churches, but with no formal denominational ties, and types B and C somewhere in between.
So a complex web of relationships.
Very much so. Understanding the diversity is key to grasping the landscape.
But ultimately, Winter's point wasn't just about structure for structure's sake, was it?
No, not at all. His fundamental point was the mission dictates the structure. The mission of the church should shape the forms it takes to accomplish that mission.
So the question is, what structures best serve the mission?
Precisely. And he saw Carey's call for specialized societies back at the start of the modern mission era as a prime example of recognizing the need for these modalities. He believed his two structures idea was just reflecting a biblical and, frankly, natural principle of how groups organize for specific tasks.
Okay, that makes sense. Now let's get practical. Defining and engaging the unreached. We talked about people groups. How exactly is that defined? It's not just about language, is it?
No, it's definitely broader than just language, though language is usually a key component. A people group is more of a sociocultural unit. It's a group of people who share a common sense of identity, often based on shared language, culture, history, ancestry, maybe religion. They see themselves as distinct from other groups. You could have multiple people groups speaking the same language, or one people group using several languages.
So it's about that shared identity, that we-ness.
Exactly. That's the crucial element.
And how do researchers actually track all these groups globally? The book mentions some lists.
Yeah, there are three main global databases that mission researchers rely on heavily. There's the CPPI from the International Mission Board.
CPPI.
Church Planting Progress Indicators. Then there's the Joshua Project list and the World Christian Database, or WCD.
And these all started with?
They all owe a huge debt to the pioneering ethnographic and statistical work of David B. Barrett. These lists are now mostly online and provide, slightly different counts and data, but they're the main tools used.
Okay. And how do they decide if a group is unreached? What's the threshold?
The most common definition is based on the percentage of evangelical Christians within the group. If it's less than 2% evangelical, it's generally considered unreached.
Less than 2%.
Yeah. And the IMB also uses that term last frontier people groups for unreached groups where there hasn't been any new church started recently, indicating the highest level of need or challenge.
So identifying them is one thing, but then comes the hard part. Engagement. What does effective engagement look like?
Well, it's definitely not a quick fly-in, fly-out thing. True engagement requires a really significant long-term commitment. It's about building deep relationships.
More than just programs.
Much more. It involves learning the language, understanding the culture deeply, building trust over time, being physically present, all working towards planting indigenous, culturally relevant churches and discipling believers within that context. It's complex, relational, long-haul work.
And the book shares some anecdotes that really illustrate these complexities, doesn't it?
It does. There's one about a missionary who was fantastic at practical help drilling wells, providing tangible aid, but felt really unprepared or hesitant to actually share the gospel message verbally in that context.
Okay, a disconnect there.
And another story involved a long-term Catholic missionary who had spent years doing linguistic work, building trust, and was quite concerned when some Protestant groups arrived, focused solely on immediate church planting, fearing it might disrupt the delicate relationships he'd built.
Right, different approaches, different timelines, potential friction.
Exactly. It highlights that reaching the unreached isn't just logistics. It demands immense cultural sensitivity, patience, collaboration, and keeping that ultimate goal of holistic transformation in view.
Holistic meaning more than just conversion numbers.
Yes. Agencies put huge effort into research, understanding the culture, social structures, needs, not just to plant churches, but aiming for genuine discipleship that transforms individuals and communities, influencing every part of life with a biblical worldview.
Okay, let's look towards more recent times and the future, contemporary trends and future directions. The book mentions the Edinburgh 2010 centenary events, like the Regnum series and the Tokyo 2010 gathering. Why were these significant?
Well, marking 100 years since the original Edinburgh conference was a big moment for reflection in itself. Tokyo 2010, specifically, tried to capture some of that Edinburgh spirit, but with a sharp focus on those remaining frontiers, the unreached.
So re-emphasizing that frontier mission task.
Yes, and also fostering greater collaboration between mission agencies globally. A key outcome was forming the Global Network of Mission Structures, GNMS, which explicitly prioritizes strategies for reaching the least reached.
Okay, collaboration and focus on frontiers. What about insider movements? The book touches on that as an ongoing discussion point.
Right. Insider movements are complex situations where people from, say, Muslim or Hindu or Buddhist backgrounds come to follow Jesus, but try to maintain significant parts of their cultural identity, sometimes even staying within their birth community's religious structures to some degree.
That sounds challenging to navigate.
Extremely. There's a lot of debate around it in mission circles. How do you discern genuine faith? Or what does discipleship look like? Are these movements sustainable? Plus, there are huge security and sensitivity issues when talking about or engaging with these movements. It's not straightforward.
Definitely sounds complex. Another major event was Lausanne the Third in Cape Town, also in 2010. What came out of that?
Cape Town 2010 was massive in terms of its global representation, leaders from almost everywhere. It really symbolized that shift away from mission being seen as primarily a Western-led enterprise.
A truly global gathering.
Absolutely. And some key themes emerged. Diaspora missiology got a lot of attention, recognizing the mission opportunities among people scattered from their homelands, living as immigrants or refugees.
Reaching people on the move.
Exactly. And also this idea of a relational paradigm, stressing that Christianity is fundamentally about relationships. Our vertical one with God and our horizontal ones with each other. That needs to be central to how we do ministry and witness.
And the Cape Town commitment document from that Congress, did it highlight specific priorities?
It did. It spoke powerfully about the need for genuine partnership and mutual support across the global church. We need each other. It also called out what it termed biblical poverty.
Biblical poverty.
Yeah, the lack of access to scripture in your own language, the need for orality methods for non-literate learners, and just the general underuse of the Bible in many communities. A call to get God's word to people effectively.
Makes sense. The book also mentions Christocentric polycentrism. That sounds academic, but what's the core idea?
Yeah, it's a bit of a mouthful. But the idea is simple. Mission is centered on Christ, Christocentric, but it flows from many centers all around the globe, polycentric, not just one or two dominant ones like in the past.
Mission from everywhere to everywhere.
Exactly. It implies humility, partnership, recognizing that God is raising up leaders and movements all over the world. No single culture owns the mission anymore.
That's a profound shift. Now, connecting spiritual warfare and mission, how did the book frame that? It might not be what people first think of.
Well, it broadened the understanding. Yes, spiritual warfare involves confronting demonic forces, prayer, deliverance. But the book suggests it also includes actively fighting against the effects of evil in the world. Things like disease, poverty, injustice, hunger, environmental degradation. Fighting these tangible evils is also seen as pushing back darkness, aligning with God's original mandate to care for creation and bring shalom.
Interesting. A more holistic view of battling evil. And finally, this idea of a new era of mission. What characterizes this new era we're supposedly in?
Several things. One is the recognition that mission isn't just over there anymore. There are no purely sending or receiving countries. The need is everywhere, including traditionally Christian nations in the West.
Mission on our doorstep, too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Another shift is away from relying only on full-time professional missionaries. There's a growing emphasis on all believers living missionally, using their everyday lives, jobs, skills, and evolution of the tent-making idea. Your vocation is your mission field.
Empowering everyone.
Yes. And crucially, this new era increasingly sees acts of service, helping the poor, seeking justice, caring for the sick, not just as like pre-evangelism or a tool to get a hearing.
But
as integral, essential parts of Christian witness in their own right. They demonstrate the love of Christ, embody the gospel, and actually create a climate where the verbal message is more likely to be received authentically. They go hand in hand.
Wow. Okay, that's covered a huge amount of ground. An incredible overview of a century of change in evangelical mission thinking. If you had to pull out just one or two key takeaways, maybe the most significant shifts you see from all this, what would they be?
Gosh, just one or two. I think for me, first is that massive, undeniable shift in energy and leadership to the global South and East. Mission is truly polycentric now. That's huge.
Yeah, that stands out.
And second, probably the sustained, increasingly sophisticated focus on those final frontiers, the unreached peoples. The determination to identify, understand, and engage every single group is remarkable.
I agree. And for me, it's been fascinating tracing how the definition of mission itself has broadened. It's not just proclamation anymore, but includes demonstrating God's love through action, seeking justice, holistic transformation. It feels much richer, more integrated.
Well said. Which really leads to a final thought, maybe a question for you, the listener, to ponder.
Yeah.
Given everything we've discussed, this interconnected world, the global church, the remaining challenges, this broader understanding of mission, how might you personally see your role in this ongoing, evolving story of God's mission?
Yeah.
Right where you are, or maybe somewhere else?
That's a great question. What does it mean for each of us to live missionally today? It's something definitely worth reflecting on. If any of these ideas have sparked your interest, maybe dig deeper into one of the movements like Lausanne, or read up on a figure like Ralph Winter, or just think about how your own faith connects with these global currents.
Absolutely.
Well, this has been incredibly insightful. Thanks for walking us through it.
My pleasure. It's a vital story to understand.
Thanks, everyone, for joining us for this deep dive.